Good morning. Good morning. Good to see you guys. We're continuing with our Gospel according to St. Mark studies. So, let's do that. Okay. When they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and some scribes arguing with them. When the whole crowd saw him, they were immediately overcome with awe, and they ran forward to greet him. He asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" Someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought you my son. He has a spirit that makes him unable to speak. And whenever it seizes him, it dashes him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. And I asked your disciples to cast it out, but they could not do so." He answered them, "You faithless generation, how much longer must I be among you? How much longer must I put up with you? Bring him to me." And they brought the boy to him. When the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. It has often cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you are able to do anything, have pity on us and help us." Jesus said to him, "If you are able, all things can be done for the one who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out, "I believe. Help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You spirit that keeps this boy from speaking and hearing, I command you, come out of him, and never enter him again." After crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he was able to stand. When he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" He said to them, "This kind can only come out through prayer." So let's have a look at this. Let's see some key details. So the disciples had been used to being able to perform really impressive miracles, but for whatever reason, they weren't able to in this case. The parent of the child asked the disciples to cast it out, but they could not do so. Let's look into that a little bit more. Jesus' first response is, "You faithless generation." So that gives us a clue as to what he's talking about here, what's important. It's that faith that's important to Jesus right now. And so he says, if you believe, amazing things can happen. Immediately the father of the child says, "I believe." And then he says, "Help my unbelief." It's not so much that he's suddenly changed his mind and suddenly has a faith that doesn't exist. Instead, he acknowledges, "Please help me with my unbelief. I know I need to get better at this." And so, sure enough, through the faith, through the desire for more faith, the child is healed. The disciples were a little frustrated. They wanted to know, why could we not cast it out? And Jesus said, "This kind can only come out through prayer. Through prayer, through faith. That's how miracles can happen." Let's roll on to the next section. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and 3 days after being killed he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying, and were afraid to ask him. So, let's see an interesting part here. So this is the second time that Jesus has said he is going to die and that he will rise again. If you remember the first time, it was St. Peter that actually gave Jesus a hard time. He said, "No, I'm not okay with this." And Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan." So no wonder the other disciples were afraid to ask anything, because the last time anybody asked anything about it, they got accused of being as bad as Satan. Yeah, I probably would keep my mouth shut too. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all, and servant of all." Then he took a little child, and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." So let's unpack this one. So what have they been arguing about? They've been arguing about which of the disciples was the greatest of all the disciples. It's interesting that we always want to feel special. It's important for us to know who's the most special, who's the favorite, who's the top of the pile. And the disciples were equally guilty of this. And so Jesus said, what you need to understand is if you want to be first, you need to put yourself last. So if you want to be the most important in the kingdom of God, you actually have to be willing to be a servant to other people. And so people who make themselves incredibly important here on earth, they're going to find themselves feeling a lot less important in the kingdom of heaven. And then he uses the example of a child. He says, if you welcome a child, and if you are kind to somebody who cannot give you anything back, then you are doing something wonderful. But if you're only nice to people for what they can give you back, then you're missing the boat. Well, that's all we have to talk about for today. I hope that you learned something, and I hope you're able to continue working on those Gospel of Mark workbooks. I shall see you sometime soon. Bye bye now.